The moment you realize that someone you trusted has betrayed you, or that something you counted on has fallen through, you stand at a crossroads that will define not just how you handle this particular crisis, but who you become as a human being. Most people, when faced with betrayal or crushing disappointment, allow these experiences to harden their hearts, close their minds, and diminish their capacity for trust, hope, and authentic connection. But there is another way, a path that transforms these painful experiences into opportunities for deeper wisdom and stronger character. For those who've walked this path of practical philosophy with us before, welcome back to another deep exploration. If this is your first encounter with these ideas, consider joining our community. We examine how ancient wisdom can guide us through the most challenging aspects of human experience. Betrayal cuts deeper than almost any other form of human suffering because it strikes at the foundation of social existence, our ability to trust and depend on others. When someone we relied upon breaks faith with us, when someone we loved proves unworthy of that love, when someone we believed in reveals themselves to be different than we thought, we don't just lose that particular relationship or opportunity. We lose our faith in our own judgment, our confidence in human nature, and our willingness to remain vulnerable to future connection. Disappointment, while often less dramatic than outright betrayal, carries its own devastating power. When we invest our hopes, energy, and identity in outcomes that don't materialize, when the job doesn't come through, the relationship doesn't work out, the project fails, the investment collapses, the health doesn't improve, we face not just the loss of what we wanted, but the collapse of the story we told ourselves about how our life would unfold. The ancient philosophers understood these experiences as among the most important tests of character we will ever face. How we respond to betrayal and disappointment reveals whether we've built our sense of meaning and identity on solid philosophical foundations or on the shifting ground of external circumstances and other people's reliability. The first rule for handling betrayal and disappointment with wisdom is perhaps the most difficult to accept. Expect human fallibility, including your own. This doesn't mean becoming cynical or paranoid, expecting the worst from everyone. It means developing realistic expectations about human nature that account for the fact that people are complex, conflicted beings who sometimes act from their worst impulses rather than their best ones. When we place someone on a pedestal, assuming they're incapable of selfishness, weakness, or poor judgment, we set ourselves up for devastating disappointment when they inevitably prove to be human. When we invest our entire sense of security in outcomes that depend on factors beyond our control, we guarantee that we'll be crushed when those factors don't align as we hoped. This realistic assessment of human nature isn't about lowering our standards or accepting poor treatment. It's about understanding that people will sometimes disappoint us despite their good intentions, that they'll sometimes betray us despite their previous loyalty, and that they'll sometimes change in ways that make continued relationship impossible despite our shared history. The second rule involves distinguishing between disappointment and devastation. Disappointment is the natural emotional response to unmet expectations. It's information about what we hoped for and how current reality differs from those hopes. Devastation is what happens when we interpret disappointment as evidence that we're fundamentally unlucky, that people can't be trusted, that life is meaningless, or that we're doomed to perpetual suffering. Disappointment says, "This didn't work out as I hoped." Devastation says, "Nothing ever works out for me." Disappointment says, "This person let me down." Devastation says, "Everyone always lets me down." Disappointment is specific and temporary. Devastation is global and permanent. The ancient masters understood that while we cannot avoid disappointment, it's an inevitable part of caring about outcomes in an uncertain world. We can avoid the additional suffering that comes from expanding disappointment into devastation. This expansion happens through the stories we tell ourselves about what disappointment means, not through the disappointment itself. When we can experience disappointment without adding layers of self-pity, victimization, or hopelessness, we maintain our capacity to learn from what happened, adjust our approach, and remain open to future possibilities. When we allow disappointment to become devastation, we close ourselves off from growth, connection, and renewed hope. The third rule centers on maintaining agency in the face of betrayal. When someone breaks faith with us, our immediate impulse is often to focus entirely on their actions, what they did, why they did it, how wrong they were, how much they've hurt us. This focus, while natural, gives away our power by making their choices the central element in our experience. The ancient philosophers taught that while we cannot control what others do to us, we always retain control over what we do in response. This response is where our real power lies, and it's where we demonstrate our character. Someone else's betrayal reveals their character, but our response to that betrayal reveals ours. This doesn't mean we ignore or minimize what others have done to us. Betrayal is real, and its effects are real. But it does mean we focus our energy on what we can influence rather than what we cannot. We cannot change the fact that someone betrayed us, but we can choose how to process that betrayal, what to learn from it, and how to move forward in ways that serve our growth and values. When we maintain focus on our own choices and responses, we reclaim the agency that betrayal tries to steal from us. We demonstrate to ourselves and others that while someone may have the power to hurt us, they don't have the power to define us or determine our future. The fourth rule involves what we might call the practice of perspective timing, understanding that our immediate emotional response to betrayal or disappointment, while valid, may not represent our permanent or even our long-term feelings about what happened. In the immediate aftermath of betrayal, everything feels catastrophic. Our pain dominates our perspective, making it difficult to see beyond the immediate crisis to longer-term possibilities and meanings. The ancient masters counseled patience with the emotional processing that follows betrayal and disappointment. They understood that healing happens in stages, that perspective changes over time, and that the full meaning of difficult experiences often doesn't become clear until much later. This doesn't mean we should suppress our immediate emotional responses or pretend they don't matter. Pain needs to be felt and processed, not bypassed or minimized. But it does mean we should be cautious about making permanent decisions based on temporary emotional states, about drawing final conclusions about life or human nature based on immediate reactions to crisis. Time doesn't heal all wounds automatically, but it does provide space for wisdom to develop alongside grief, for understanding to emerge alongside anger, and for new possibilities to become visible alongside the ruins of old hopes. When we can hold our immediate pain alongside the recognition that our perspective will evolve, we maintain our capacity for growth even in the midst of loss. The fifth rule centers on distinguishing between forgiveness and reconciliation. Many people struggle with betrayal because they believe that forgiveness requires returning to relationship with those who have hurt them, or that refusing to reconcile means they're unable to forgive. This confusion keeps them trapped between resentment that eats away at their peace and premature reconciliation that sets them up for repeated betrayal. Forgiveness is an internal process that frees us from the poison of ongoing resentment. It doesn't require forgetting what happened, excusing the betrayer's behavior, or returning to previous levels of trust and intimacy. Forgiveness means releasing our attachment to punishment and revenge, choosing not to define ourselves by our victimization, and refusing to let someone else's poor choices continue controlling our emotional state. Reconciliation, on the other hand, is a relational process that requires genuine repentance, demonstrated change, and rebuilt trust over time. It should never be rushed, and it shouldn't happen without clear evidence that the conditions that led to betrayal have actually changed. Some relationships can be repaired after betrayal, but others cannot and should not be. Understanding this distinction allows us to forgive for our own peace and growth while maintaining appropriate boundaries for our protection and well-being. We can wish someone well from a distance without inviting them back into positions where they can hurt us again. How many times have you remained stuck in resentment because you thought forgiveness required forgetting, or rushed back into harmful relationships because you thought forgiveness required reconciliation? The sixth rule for navigating betrayal and disappointment involves what the ancient philosophers called the transformation of loss into wisdom, learning to extract valuable insights from painful experiences rather than allowing them to become sources of permanent bitterness or victimization. This isn't about pretending that betrayal was a gift or that disappointment was secretly good for us. It's about refusing to let pain be wasted by ensuring it contributes to our understanding of ourselves, others, and the nature of life. Every betrayal teaches us something about human nature, about the warning signs we may have missed, about the difference between who people present themselves to be and who they actually are. Every disappointment reveals something about our expectations, our assumptions, and our attachment to outcomes beyond our control. When we can approach these painful experiences as sources of education rather than just sources of suffering, we transform them from purely destructive forces into tools for growth. This transformation requires a particular kind of intellectual honesty, the willingness to examine our own role in what happened without excusing others' poor behavior, and the courage to acknowledge our naive expectations without blaming ourselves for having hope. We might recognize that we ignored red flags because we wanted to believe the best about someone. We might realize that we invested too much of our identity in outcomes we couldn't control. We might discover that we trusted too quickly or hoped too carelessly. These insights don't excuse betrayal or guarantee that disappointment was deserved. They simply help us learn from experience in ways that make us wiser and more resilient going forward. When we can extract wisdom from pain, we ensure that our suffering serves a constructive purpose rather than simply depleting our resources and hardening our hearts. The seventh rule involves maintaining what we might call selective trust, the ability to continue forming meaningful connections with others without becoming either paranoid or naive. After betrayal, many people swing between two equally destructive extremes, either trusting no one and isolating themselves from meaningful relationship, or trusting everyone equally and setting themselves up for repeated hurt. The ancient masters understood that wisdom lies in developing more sophisticated judgment about trustworthiness rather than abandoning trust altogether. This means learning to distinguish between people who have earned our trust through consistent behavior over time and those who have merely claimed to be trustworthy through words and promises. Selective trust involves matching the level of trust we offer to the level of trustworthiness someone has demonstrated. We can be friendly with many people while confiding in few. We can collaborate professionally with someone while maintaining personal boundaries. We can appreciate someone's positive qualities while acknowledging their limitations and protecting ourselves accordingly. This approach allows us to remain open to new relationships and opportunities without being foolishly vulnerable to those who haven't earned that vulnerability. It recognizes that trust is not a binary choice between complete openness and total isolation, but a spectrum of connection that should be calibrated to match demonstrated reliability. The development of selective trust also involves learning to trust our own intuition and judgment more deeply. Often, when we look back on betrayals, we realize that we had subtle warning signs that we ignored or dismissed. Learning to pay attention to these internal signals, feelings of unease, inconsistencies in someone's behavior, gut reactions that something isn't right, can help us avoid future betrayals without becoming suspiciously paranoid. The eighth rule centers on what the philosophers called the discipline of non-attachment, learning to care deeply about people and outcomes while maintaining enough emotional distance to remain stable when things don't work out as hoped. This is perhaps one of the most misunderstood concepts in philosophy, often confused with indifference or emotional numbness. Non-attachment doesn't mean we stop caring about results or stop forming deep connections with others. It means we care about these things without making our peace of mind dependent on them unfolding according to our preferences. We can love someone deeply while accepting that they might choose to leave. We can work passionately toward goals while remaining equanimous about outcomes we cannot control. This practice requires developing what might be called emotional resilience, the capacity to experience loss without being destroyed by it, to feel disappointment without being consumed by it, to encounter betrayal without becoming bitter or closed-hearted. We maintain our ability to care while building our capacity to survive caring. Non-attachment is cultivated through regular contemplation of the temporary nature of all relationships, circumstances, and achievements. Everything we currently have will eventually be lost, if not through betrayal or disappointment, then through the natural processes of change, aging, and death. When we remember this regularly during good times, we're less likely to be devastated when losses inevitably occur. This practice doesn't make us pessimistic or prevent us from enjoying what we have. Instead, it helps us appreciate current blessings more fully because we understand their temporary nature, and it prepares us to handle future losses with greater grace because we've accepted their inevitability. The ninth rule involves developing what we might call emotional boundaries, clear internal guidelines about how much of our energy and emotional well-being we're willing to invest in people and situations that have proven unreliable. After betrayal or disappointment, many people make the mistake of either cutting off all investment in future relationships and goals, or immediately returning to the same level of emotional investment that led to their previous pain. Emotional boundaries involve learning to calibrate our investment based on demonstrated reliability rather than hoped for potential. Someone who has betrayed us once might deserve a second chance under certain circumstances, but they don't automatically deserve the same level of trust and emotional investment they had before the betrayal occurred. These boundaries are not walls designed to keep everyone out, but filters designed to ensure that we invest our emotional energy wisely. They help us distinguish between people who deserve our vulnerability and those who have proven themselves unworthy of it. They allow us to remain open to connection while protecting ourselves from repeated harm. The establishment of emotional boundaries also involves learning to recognize and honor our own emotional needs rather than constantly sacrificing them for others' convenience or approval. We might need more time to rebuild trust than someone else thinks is reasonable. We might need different kinds of reassurance than we needed before betrayal occurred. We might need to maintain certain protective measures that feel unnecessary to others who haven't experienced what we've experienced. Honoring these needs isn't selfishness or inability to forgive, it's self-respect and wisdom based on experience. When we ignore our own emotional needs to accommodate others' timelines or preferences, we often set ourselves up for resentment and repeated disappointment. The 10th rule centers on maintaining hope without naive optimism. After betrayal and disappointment, many people struggle with the balance between protecting themselves from future pain and remaining open to future possibility. They fear that hope will make them vulnerable to repeated hurt, but they also recognize that cynicism and despair make life meaningless and joyless. The ancient philosophers distinguished between naive hope, the assumption that everything will work out simply because we want it to, and wise hope, the commitment to continue pursuing meaningful goals and relationships despite uncertainty about outcomes. Naive hope depends on guarantees that life cannot provide. Wise hope accepts uncertainty while choosing to engage with life fully anyway. Wise hope is grounded in acceptance of life's fundamental unpredictability rather than denial of it. We hope for positive outcomes while preparing ourselves psychologically for the possibility that things might not work out as planned. We invest our energy in relationships and goals that matter to us while maintaining enough emotional flexibility to adapt when circumstances change. This kind of hope is actually more sustainable than naive optimism because it doesn't collapse when faced with difficulty. Instead of being devastated by every setback, we can experience disappointment as information about how to adjust our approach rather than evidence that hope itself is foolish. What would become possible in your life if you could maintain wise hope without naive vulnerability? The 11th rule for transforming betrayal and disappointment into wisdom involves what we might call the practice of antifragility, developing the capacity not just to survive difficult experiences, but to become stronger, wiser, and more capable because of them. This goes beyond resilience, which implies bouncing back to our previous state. Antifragility means using stress, betrayal, and disappointment as raw materials for building enhanced character and capability. Most people approach betrayal and disappointment with the goal of getting back to where they were before these experiences occurred. They want to restore their previous level of trust, return to their former optimism, and recreate the sense of security they had before learning that life can be unpredictable and people can be unreliable. But this approach misses the opportunity that difficulty provides for developing strengths we couldn't have developed through comfort alone. The ancient masters understood that some of our most valuable qualities, wisdom, resilience, compassion for others' suffering, appreciation for genuine goodness, can only be fully developed through encountering their opposites. We cannot become truly wise without experiencing the consequences of foolishness. We cannot develop real resilience without facing genuine threats. We cannot deeply appreciate loyalty without encountering betrayal. This doesn't mean we should seek out betrayal and disappointment, or that we should be grateful for people who hurt us. It means we can choose to use these inevitable experiences as opportunities for development rather than allowing them to diminish our capacity for engagement with life. Antifragility is cultivated by asking different questions about difficult experiences. Instead of only asking, "Why did this happen to me?" or "How can I avoid this in the future?" we also ask, "What strength can I build from this experience?" And "How can this challenge develop capacities I didn't know I had?" Someone who survives betrayal might discover reserves of inner strength they never knew they possessed. Someone who endures disappointment might develop a more sophisticated understanding of what truly matters to them. Someone who navigates loss might find deeper appreciation for what remains and greater capacity for helping others who face similar challenges. The 12th rule involves what the philosophers called the long view of justice, understanding that the universe operates according to principles that ensure consequences eventually align with choices, even when immediate circumstances seem to reward betrayal and punish faithfulness. This isn't about believing in cosmic intervention or assuming that bad people always get punished in obvious ways. It's about recognizing the internal consequences of our choices that persist regardless of external outcomes. When someone betrays us, we often focus entirely on what they gained through their betrayal and what we lost through trusting them. We see them succeeding while we suffer, and we conclude that dishonesty is rewarded while honesty is punished. But this perspective only accounts for immediate, external consequences while ignoring the deeper, internal consequences that unfold over time. People who betray others must live with the knowledge of what they've done. They must maintain the psychological defenses necessary to justify their actions to themselves. They must navigate the internal contradictions between their self-image and their behavior. They must live with the fear that others might treat them as they have treated others. They must build relationships on foundations of deception that require constant maintenance and create constant anxiety. Meanwhile, people who maintain their integrity despite being betrayed preserve their self-respect, their ability to sleep peacefully, their capacity for authentic relationship, and their confidence that they can trust their own character under pressure. These internal rewards persist regardless of external circumstances. This long view of justice doesn't minimize the real pain of betrayal or the legitimate frustration of seeing dishonest people prosper in the short term. But it does provide perspective that helps us maintain our commitment to acting with integrity even when that commitment seems to be unrewarded or even punished by immediate circumstances. The 13th and final rule centers on what we might call the gift of discernment, the enhanced ability to recognize authenticity, trustworthiness, and genuine character that often develops through experiencing their opposites. People who have been betrayed and disappointed often develop sophisticated radar for detecting manipulation, false promises, and superficial charm that serves them well in all future relationships and decisions. This discernment is one of the most valuable gifts that difficult experiences can provide, but only if we remain open to learning rather than becoming bitter or paranoid. When we can extract this wisdom from our pain, we become much better at surrounding ourselves with people of genuine character and much better at avoiding those who would take advantage of our goodness. The development of discernment involves learning to distinguish between healthy skepticism and toxic cynicism. Healthy skepticism makes us more careful about extending trust without making us incapable of trusting. Toxic cynicism assumes the worst about everyone and closes us off from meaningful connection entirely. Healthy skepticism asks for evidence of trustworthiness before offering vulnerability. Toxic cynicism assumes that evidence of trustworthiness must be fake or temporary. Healthy skepticism protects us from repeated betrayal. Toxic cynicism protects us from authentic relationship as well. The cultivation of discernment also involves learning to recognize the difference between people who make mistakes and people who operate from fundamentally dishonest or manipulative character. Everyone will disappoint us occasionally because everyone is imperfect. But some people disappoint us because they're struggling with their own limitations, while others disappoint us because they're willing to prioritize their immediate desires over their commitments to others. Learning to make this distinction allows us to offer appropriate patience to those who deserve it while maintaining appropriate boundaries with those who don't. It helps us extend grace to people who are genuinely trying while protecting ourselves from those who are genuinely exploitative. As these 13 rules become integrated into our approach to life, something remarkable happens. Betrayal and disappointment, while still painful, lose their power to devastate or define us. We develop what the ancient philosophers called inner citadel, a core of stability that remains unshaken regardless of external circumstances or others' choices. This doesn't mean we become invulnerable to pain or immune to loss. It means we become capable of experiencing these inevitable aspects of human life without being destroyed by them. We can care deeply while remaining stable. We can hope sincerely while accepting uncertainty. We can trust appropriately while maintaining wisdom about human nature. The person who has learned to handle betrayal and disappointment philosophically becomes someone others naturally turn to during their own crises, because they radiate the kind of tested strength that only comes from having faced difficulty and emerged with character intact. They become sources of stability in an unstable world, not because nothing bad has happened to them, but because they've learned to respond to bad things with wisdom rather than reactivity. How might your entire approach to relationships and goals change if you knew that you could handle whatever losses and betrayals life might bring? As we integrate these 13 principles into our lived experience, we begin to understand what the ancient philosophers meant when they spoke of philosophy as a way of life rather than merely an intellectual exercise. These rules don't just help us survive betrayal and disappointment. They transform us into people who are genuinely difficult to betray because we no longer depend on others' reliability for our fundamental sense of worth and security. This transformation happens gradually and often imperceptibly. We notice that we're less reactive when plans fall through, less devastated when people prove unreliable, less desperate for guarantees about future outcomes. We discover that we can love deeply without clinging possessively, work passionately without being crushed by setbacks, and hope sincerely without being naive about life's uncertainties. The person who has learned to handle betrayal and disappointment philosophically develops what might be called earned wisdom, insights that can only come through direct experience of life's difficulties rather than through theoretical study. This wisdom manifests as a quality of presence that others immediately recognize and are drawn to. People sense that they're in the company of someone who has been tested and proven, someone who won't fall apart when things get difficult. This tested quality makes us better friends, partners, parents, and colleagues because others know they can depend on our stability even when they can't depend on external circumstances. We become sources of strength not because we're invulnerable to loss, but because we've demonstrated our ability to maintain our core values and essential character regardless of what we lose. The integration of these principles also reveals something profound about the nature of human resilience. We discover that we're capable of surviving and even thriving through experiences that once would have seemed unbearable. This discovery fundamentally changes our relationship to future uncertainty because we know from direct experience that we can handle whatever comes, even if we can't control what comes. This isn't about becoming hardened or emotionally numb. If anything, the person who has learned to handle loss philosophically often becomes more emotionally available and empathetic, not less. They can afford to feel deeply because they're no longer afraid of being destroyed by difficult emotions. They can offer genuine support to others in crisis because they've navigated their own crises successfully. The 13 rules we've explored work together to create what the ancient masters called philosophical armor. Not a shell that keeps life out, but a framework for engaging with life fully while maintaining inner stability. This armor is forged through practice, tested through difficulty, and strengthened through consistent application of principles even when emotions run high and external pressures mount. Each time we choose to extract wisdom from betrayal rather than allowing it to make us bitter, each time we maintain hope despite disappointment, each time we forgive for our own peace rather than for others' convenience, each time we rebuild with better boundaries rather than refusing to rebuild at all, we strengthen this philosophical armor and deepen our capacity for conscious living. The ripple effects of this transformation extend far beyond our personal experience. When we model how to handle betrayal and disappointment with grace and wisdom, we give others permission to do the same. When we demonstrate that it's possible to maintain integrity even when others don't, we inspire others to hold themselves to higher standards. When we show that loss doesn't have to lead to bitterness, we offer hope to those who are struggling with their own disappointments. Our families become more resilient when they see that difficulties can be survived and even transformed into strength. Our workplaces become more functional when they include people who can handle setbacks without drama or blame. Our communities become healthier when they're populated by individuals who respond to adversity with wisdom rather than reactivity. Perhaps most importantly, the mastery of these principles frees us to pursue what truly matters without being paralyzed by fear of loss or betrayal. When we know we can handle whatever difficulties arise, we become capable of taking appropriate risks, forming deep relationships, and committing to meaningful goals without the constant anxiety that characterizes those who haven't developed philosophical resilience. This freedom to engage fully with life, paradoxically, often leads to fewer betrayals and disappointments because we're no longer attracting relationships and situations based on neediness, desperation, or naive trust. We attract connections based on mutual respect and shared values. We make decisions based on wisdom rather than wishful thinking. We invest our energy in people and goals that have proven themselves worthy of that investment. The person who has integrated these 13 rules often finds that their life becomes simultaneously more stable and more adventurous. More stable because their sense of worth and security doesn't depend on external factors remaining constant. More adventurous because they're no longer paralyzed by fear of loss or failure. This is the ultimate gift that betrayal and disappointment can offer when approached with philosophical wisdom. Not just survival of difficult experiences, but transformation into someone who is genuinely equipped for whatever life might bring. Not just recovery from loss, but development of capacities that wouldn't have been possible without encountering loss. The ancient philosophers understood that our most painful experiences often become our greatest teachers if we remain open to their lessons. They recognized that character is forged in the crucible of difficulty, that wisdom emerges from surviving folly, and that true strength develops through facing genuine challenges rather than avoiding them. Every betrayal we face becomes an opportunity to practice these principles and strengthen our philosophical foundation. Every disappointment becomes a chance to demonstrate to ourselves that our peace doesn't depend on getting what we want. Every loss becomes an occasion for discovering that we're more resilient than we previously imagined. The choice is always ours. Will we allow difficult experiences to diminish us? Or will we use them as raw material for building stronger character? Will we become bitter about others' failures?